In every heartache, there's a hidden seed. Join Portia Booker on The Grief Grantor as we journey through stories of resilience, finding gratitude in the echoes of grief. Together, we transform sorrow into strength, pain into purpose. Welcome to The Grief Grantor, where your healing journey begins.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Grief Grantor. I am your host, Portia Booker. You guys, one of the things that I really want to talk about today, first and foremost, how are we really doing? And I ask that question because when I think about my grief journey, one of the things that I have not really talked about is the grief of letting go of previous versions of myself. Let me say that one more time. The grief of letting go of previous versions of myself. We're kind of just getting out of the Christmas season. And one of the things that I thought about on Christmas Day, a lot of us celebrate the birth of Jesus, whether it's, in whatever religious denomination we celebrate the birth of Jesus. But I thought of it more so the birth of the rebirth of myself, right? Because we celebrate every single year the birth of Jesus coming into the world and his journey of paving the way for us to have eternal life, whatever that may look like for each and every one of us. But what about the rebirth of each and every one of us, right? We're not the same person who we were yesterday, the year before. Each and every day, each and every moment, we change and we advance. One of the things that I really noticed about myself towards the end of 2023 was there was a part of Portia that was afraid to be assertive. There was a part of me that felt that assertiveness equated to, oh, I'm changing into this nasty person, or people aren't going to accept me for who I am. But when I think about it now, assertiveness is a part of self-love. I'm going to say that one more time. Assertiveness is a part of self-love. And when I really started to be assertive about, number one, my needs, number two, finding gratitude in each and every moment and each and every day, number three, also, when I was being assertive about what I really wanted, I noticed there was a shift within me. There was a part of me that was like, go, Portia, go. Go, Portia, go. And I noticed not only just the change in the relationships around me, but I even noticed the change within myself where I started to become more comfortable, more relaxed, more calm. Like, this isn't as hard as what I thought it was, right? And so when I think about shedding those layers of Portia, the older versions of me that I wanted to hold on to, right? Holding on to the different friendships that I've outgrown, the different relationships or even circles that are no longer in alignment with my values. There was a part of me that was afraid of letting those go because I was afraid of being alone. But I think when I think about it now, I would rather be alone in my own company and be content than be alone amongst others who, whether they intentionally or unintentionally, make me feel that way. And so when I say that to all of you today, let's think about, number one, when we're letting go of old versions of ourselves, find gratitude in where you are today, right? Be present with who you are, the skills, the knowledge, the mindset that you've acquired. Number two, you sharing your journey, whether it's through a blog or even in a journal, helps you to build resilience, right? Number three, being intentional. I've learned to be more intentional with my time, more intentional with my energy. It's kind of like what I like to call, I've budgeted my energy just like how I budget my money, And number four, I would say also it's given me a platform to be empowered. And I say this because there's so many individuals who I've met who come to me and they're like, Portia, I'm just like amazed by your journey of how you've literally alchemized your grief, where you're able to go about your day, still honor your grief, and also still enjoy life. And I'd say number five, finding forgiveness. I was able to forgive obviously all the people who have encountered me and been on my journey, but also the old versions of myself, because I needed those older versions of Portia to get to the Portia who you see today. So we're going to take a quick break right here on the Grief Grantor, everybody. When we come back, we're going to be joined by our resident guest, Miss Laura Brennan Ballet. We're going to continue the conversation on being empowered through letting go of old versions of ourselves. So we'll be right back here on the Grief Grantor.
Greetings, I'm Angel Marie Monticelli, host of Energize You TV, every Thursday at 11 a.m. Pacific Time. Go to Fresh Takes right here on E360 and get Reikified and energized today.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Grief Grantor. Today, as I mentioned, we are joined by our resident guest, Miss Laura Brennan Ballet. Laura, how is it going?
Oh, hello. I just loved that intro. I have already taken a paper full of notes just from the few minutes of everything you've expressed, but just grateful. I know the world is always challenging, but for those of us, I think, that are in the practice of not only seeking out, but aligning with gratitude for what is going right in the world, that's what I am just saddling right up to, just anything and everything to be grateful for. So loved the holiday season, and I'm really looking forward to an empowering new year.
I'm with you there, Laura. I think, through the challenges that we encounter, right, there's a level of courage that we develop, right? And as I mentioned in my opening, one part of grief that we tend to not talk about is the grief of shedding older versions of ourselves, right? I want to say that this would be categorized as probably disenfranchised grief, right? Because each and every season that we go through in our life, we're advancing, we're evolving, we're meeting new people, we're taking new risks, we're taking new steps and strides. And Laura, I really wanted to have you on to really talk about this from an empowered standpoint, right? When you think about the previous versions of you, Laura, the previous versions of Laura throughout the years, how has embracing gratitude for the former versions of you contributed to your personal growth and your transformation?
Yeah, I love this question. And, as you were talking right on the onset of the show, I was thinking about what is it that we're all so afraid of letting go of that aspect of ourself. If we look at the relationship with that part of ourselves, what is all kind of entangled in there that stops us from empowering that exploration into the next version of who we could become? And so many of us really get attached to the story. And right, that story becomes the habit. The habit becomes the pattern. The pattern then creates this behavior. And then we identify with that aspect of the personality. And we feel that if we let go of who we think we are, that's it. It's over. It's done. And there's so many layers to that. For me, my brother and I both grew up in a home where this continuity of newness was very prevalent. My mom was a designer and an artist. My dad was always involved in local, coaching. And so we had a lot of movement in our family. And so the movement within and outside always kind of supported. But on a personal level, if I think back of the moments that I was really challenged, a love affair or maybe a friendship that really mattered, but then that dissolved, letting go of an old job that maybe you thought was really going to be a staying, career, all of these parts of the human condition. I learned early on that the story I told myself and how I attached myself to that story, that's where the rub, right, was born. But I love how you also brought in the story of what Jesus can represent for all of us, whether we're religious or not. We can look at the story of rebirth and how we can use that to empower our newness. And I feel that if we looked at how exciting life is and could be by recreating, rewriting, reinventing that part of us that has yet to come out, that we've yet to discover, what an empowering life we all could live.
Laura, I agree. I love how you brought up how we get attached
Mm,
to a certain story or a certain narrative,
yeah.
right? And Laura, I'm curious, what did it take for you to, in a sense, no pun intended, divorce from a certain story
Yeah.
and really embrace the new story that is unknown, that, you're kind of like a little baby that's learning how to walk for the first time? What did it take for you to embrace that new narrative uncomfortably, but with a comfortable hug?
So this again, great question. And what I found is the patterns that were reoccurring weren't necessarily making me happy. They weren't necessarily bringing out the highest and best aspect of myself. So when I started to see things that either I didn't like or weren't really aligned with a vision or a goal or a dream, I would start asking, what is it? What am I attracting? What am I manifesting? What am I creating that really isn't aligned with my highest and best self? There's more to me. There's more to this life. What can I bring into the human condition? How can I contribute something other than just what I need, just what I want? And this goes back to my childhood with showing up and volunteering, whether it was at church or doing neighborhood, gathering projects. We, worked, and on holidays we would go and serve soup at our soup kitchens. Like, my parents always had us doing things to remind us it isn't just about you. There are other people involved in this human experience. And when I started to see things in myself that, not that I didn't like, but as we've talked about, maybe that I needed to forgive, and I needed to find the grace and the gratitude for myself and maybe someone else, it really began to open up this exploration into shedding that old skin, that old image, and finding the joy and the creative energy in being someone different. And it's okay to become different than who you used to be. We're not meant to just stay the same. And I think if we can take this moment, that what I'm going to say, with us for the listening audience, if we were here to recreate ourselves all the time, I think our life would be much more fun, much more exciting. And I find that we would create more purpose with one another if we realized we can become someone different and we can use that to serve the greater good. Now, what can I do to have that influence, that power within the human condition to empower one another? And you can only do that through advancement, through growth. And we do that when we change who we were before and who we become now.
Laura, I love what you just brought up about the beauty in recreating, reinventing who we are, right? And I think in our society, we get so fixated on, well, this is my job as a data scientist. This is who I am, right? We get so consumed and wrapped up in the title, but we don't realize that there's other dimensions to us, right? I know people who are very professional in their job roles, but they're super creative. They're super goofy. I sometimes ask them, Laura, why haven't they, toured around with the comedy train? Because I mean, they're hysterical, right? And I think, Laura, this is why I think grief is such a powerful experience, because in a sense, it forces us, if we're open to it, right, to reinvent and recreate who we are, right? Because when grief happens, grief is the result of a loss or change. It's the emotional response to it. So if that's the case, right, what are we going to do as individuals if it's written in our human contract that grief is a part of the journey? How can we learn to embrace grief with an uncomfortable hug,
Yeah.
right? And really get to know ourselves and create who we choose to be, right? And Laura, I'm curious for you, when we talk about reinvention, recreating, right? What part of Laura do you see that maybe you envisioned as your child, as a child, that you see today?
Yeah, this is so amazing. You and I, off our showtime, talk about the synergistic relationship that is just so naturally present in our life. We were talking about this just at the Christmas gathering yesterday, and how when I was young, fourth grade, Mr. Grunfeld's class, I was 9 years old. I wrote a book on empowerment. And I was up at the front of the class. Now, this was on beauty and fashion, right? Because I was a little girl. And, you know, when you went to school, it was a big deal. You picked your outfit out the night before and how you put pigtails in your hair, whatever we did. But it was just, I remember clearly talking about this and feeling this very natural extension of who I was. And then as life moved through its phases, that was always there, but became less and less. As you said, we take on a job, we take on a role, we attach the story and the meaning and the purpose to it, which isn't always the right meaning, right? It isn't always. It's just kind of what we do. And we think because of what we do, that's who we become, when it actually is the opposition. We can do something, but it is not who we are. And so I think if we can tap back into our childhood, many of us might find the answer to a lot of the adult questioning. Who do I want to be? How can I become that version, that innocent, full, empowered, beautiful, untouched, undisturbed nature, the innocence of childhood? Because, right, when we're kids, everything is possible. Even in the worst of situations, right, there are people that are living in environments that are not conducive to really becoming our highest and best. And yet there are beautiful examples of empowered people that come out of those environments for that reason. They never let that part of that connection, they don't let it go. Whether they're a singer or a teacher or a preacher, or it doesn't matter. They grow up and they have a phenomenal house cleaning service, real estate business, gardening, landscaping. It doesn't matter. But there's something in that childhood dream pipe that they don't let go of, and they find a way out. So I think creating the relationship with that resilient aspect of ourself and using it to empower the moment of today to advance forward into some new aspect of ourself really does spark the grief process into a more acceptable journey. And yes, those uncomfortable hugs, they can be, but they also hold so much power in them and so much opportunity that I think if we can begin to work the mindset a little differently and look at that uncomfortable energy as an actual gateway of energy, we can then start to really move ourselves forward.
Laura, I love what you brought up about in your childhood, right? Going back to school, you pick out your outfits. You know, it kind of reminds me of when I used to watch the soap operas on TV with my great grandmother. All my children like
Yeah.
sand through the hourglass. I can memorize, like, when I think about that time of my life and the things that I used to do. You know, one of the things I still do to this day is journal. I'm definitely a big journaler. I love writing. You know, the other thing that I was really big on was being creative. My mom really invested in my craft young. She started with me buying me a little point and shoot Kodak camera, and then that turned into me starting to do little video projects. So it's like that creative part of me has always been there. But then I take my first corporate role and I started to divorce from that because somebody, in a sense, implanted in me, oh, you need to grow up. Right.
Yeah.
But I find that me revisiting and rekindling that part of me, that little girl, that little version of Portia, um, when I find myself going back to her and having just dialogue or whatever, just going into photography or something creative, I find myself being more fulfilled. Like I'm able to really connect the dots, like what you said, and I think more of us need to, or if we can, if we're open to it, go back to that version of ourselves, right? Really rekindle that, because there's so much goodness and so much richness in it that can enhance our life and make life so beautiful. I mean, life is already beautiful as it is, but I think if we go back and connect with that inner child, I feel like there's a multitude of problems that could be solved by just taking that simple step. And I love, Laura, how you reiterated about what are we afraid of? Kids are fearless.
Yep.
Laura, can you answer this question as a parent, right? How can we empower others to shed this identity that they have to stay in this one bracket, right? They have to stay in their corporate role, and they're finding that they're not fulfilled all the way, right? There's parts of it, right? There's multi dimensions of each and every one of us, right? How can they connect with that version of themselves, that curious child? How can they reconnect with that curious child and, in a sense, go with it or go at it with grace? Because I think in our society, we've conditioned so many people to just cut things off cold turkey or let go of things cold turkey. But as me and you both know, it takes some steps. So how can we help others to rekindle that curious child spirit with grace as adults?
Yeah. Again, I have two daughters, and we were just talking about this. And I have a client that was going through something similar too. In her early 20s, she had a very serious relationship, and it broke right before Christmas, right before, New Year's, all the plans. And we were talking about, if you were a child, pick an age, and we went through an exercise, and maybe 10 and under, and then 10 to 15, and then maybe 15 to 18. And as we started moving through this, she started to see herself how there was a freedom when she was young, that even if she had a really great friend, but they got into a little fight, she'd run home, maybe be sad, Mom, Sally and I got into a fight, but then what would our mom say? It's going to be okay. It will work itself out. Maybe you have another friend, go outside, go play, whatever it was. And she started to realize, I didn't hang on to it as much. I kind of found my way through it, went back to school, whatever it was. And then as we moved through the teenage years, right, you start to realize you take things a little more personally. You take them like, oh, what's wrong with me? Oh, should I change in order for that person to like me? Should I become someone different in order to fit in? But what I love about childhood empowerment is, first of all, it's nature is so raw that we don't even know that we're these empowered beings. We just are. And then the human condition starts to tweak at us a little bit and break us down a little bit. And then we find a way to fit into the structure of what we think we should do. We do this as adults. What I would say to all the adults, find that spark that connects you back to that little one. I don't care if you're a man or a woman, whatever it is, you find the spark of remembrance of something that brought you playfulness and joy, and that unabashed knowing that I can do anything at any time. And really the playfulness. Now, we can't all be 20, 30, 40, and 70 and 80-year-olds running around and not doing a job and taking care of the grown-up responsibilities. But what we can do is we can begin to create a little side hustle with our inner child. We can begin to tap in. The adult coloring books are a beautiful therapeutic outlet for this. The journaling, and I'm going to take a moment to acknowledge my friend Laura Katanen of Ziello Studios, and she has a 4R framework. And part of that in there says reimagine. Reimagine the story now. You and I love to say reinvent, redesign. Really go into that inner architect and start creating a new blueprint and connect back to the energetic of that innocence, playful, empowered kid, and bring it into your adulthood. So maybe you have to work that 9 to 5 hustle to take care of what you need to take care of. But now maybe on a Saturday, you can take a course, you can get a friend, you can start to do something and just have fun and get more acquainted with that aspect of you that is still very much in you, but has been buried under a grief process or a letting go process or a fear process. But that aspect of who we are, that we were born into this physicality with, will always be there. We just lose, as you said, divorce, but we lose the connection. The disconnect becomes very fragmented. Now we're going to start putting it back together. And I think just having fun and being creative and find that inner child and let them come out and play. And I think when we're going through grief, this is really a beautiful aspect of healing through the grief process. What would my inner child need? And if I'm the adult now and I'm looking at that little part of me, how can I now talk to that part of me so that I can empower her or him through the process of the letting go? Whatever that may be.
Laura, I couldn't have said it better. I mean, just giving ourselves permission, right? Like granting ourselves permission to reconnect with that version of ourselves, allowing more fun and play into our life, right? Because I think when we become adults, there's this like fixated narrative that we have to cut off all fun activities, and that's not the case. We need that. We need those extracurriculars. We need that social activity. We need that reconnection and rekindling to the things that used to spark our light. Like, you know, when we would light sparklers during the 4th of July, we need that. I still get fascinated by sparklers.
Me too.
So we need
I'm a
that
kid.
still
Yeah.
as adults.
Yeah.
So we're going to take our first quick break right here on the Grief Grantor, everybody. When we come back, we're going to continue our conversation with Laura Brennan Ballet. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Amy Joy, and I'm the host of Get Your Together Live with Amy Joy. And you can catch me every Thursday at 4 p.m. Pacific on the amazing Trajectory channel right here on E360 TV.
All right, everybody. Welcome back right here on the Grief Grantor. We are joined by our resident guest, Miss Laura Brennan Ballet, and we were just having an amazing conversation about reconnecting with that curious child in order to really help yourself, not only through seasons of grief, but also to add more richness and empowerment into your life. Laura, I'm going to switch gears here. You know, one of my favorite words has become the word intention. And let's be realistic. I feel like curious children are very intentional about where they put their energy, right? If they want to learn how to do multiple tumbles, or they want to start figure skating, or, you know, learning how to draw, they're very intentional about where they put their energy. And so I'm curious, Laura, for you, as we both know, intention is a very powerful tool in our toolbox. What does setting clear intentions look like for you, and what is your process?
I just, as you were talking about a child, and again, think of being that younger version and why intention is such a natural flow. It's an extension from the creative force field because we have no limits. We do not sit down with our paper, our coloring book, our Legos, a racetrack, or go into bring it into the future, gamification to design any aspect of new technology. Younger minds don't go in thinking, I can't do that. That's a limit. That's a hard stop. they automatically just keep pushing that wall further away. So that creativity is just naturally there. So when I go to write content, when I go to anything that I'm creating, and you and I have so much going on behind the scenes with this, there's no limit. So my process is I am an unlimited human being. There is nothing that will block my creative process but my own thinking. Old story, old fear, whatever it may come in, I'm able to look at that and know that's just an aspect of the ego or the personality that's showing up with some hesitation, with some fear or an insecurity or lack of confidence, whatever it may be. And then I remind myself, that's just a story. It's just a thought process that's showing up in the moment, but it isn't who I am. I am an unlimited, empowered, creative force. You know, I speak about this in the science of empowerment. Coded in our DNA is the same atoms and ions and force that creates this blue jewel that we float on in the middle of space. We are part of that. So to think that we are anything less than what we can think into creation is a limited mindset. And then if we move from that limited mindset, what happens? Our intention cannot be fully aligned with what we want to create. So I always run through the J3 equals 8. What is my awareness around my intention? What am I willing to do about that? Right? Where's my accountability? Now critical thinking comes in. I let that go. I let all the emotionality, insecurities, whatever the rub is, I just let it go. I dissolve it. And what I tell myself in that moment is, okay, suspend that thought. Think of positive intelligence just streaming through this body. Think about that childlike energy, right? I can do anything. I can fly. I can become invisible. I can change the world. I can uplift everybody, right? Because that's what we think when we're kids. Everything is possible. Energy, negative, positive, neutral. Well, I want to be a positive force for good. Now, when I start to move through that formula and I move through those principles and I just give myself those quick answers like that, now my intention becomes more clear. I can do everything when I put my mind to it. And my mind is now aligned with the force of the universe behind me, the God force, however we want to look at it. And if I don't know how to quite do it, guess what? Now I call my friends. Now I call my mentors. Now I call my coach. Now I have a partnership that helps me bring that intention forward into creational manifestation. This is how I live my life every day, and it works.
Laura, and as you just really reiterated, the power of intention, right? Like there's so much richness in this. And I want to really piggyback or pivot back to how I opened the show about letting go of previous versions of ourselves, right? As we both know, it's rewarding to shed weight, right? It's amazing to shed weight.
Yeah. Physically and emotionally.
I agree. You know, it's like who wants to walk around constipated all the time? I mean, you know, no pun intended, constipated people, some of them don't give a crap, but I'm not going to go there. So, you know, but the thing of it is when we're letting go of previous versions of ourselves, sometimes it's a rocky road, right? And it's a beautiful journey of personal discovery when we do this, right? So Laura, how can, number one, setting intentions, right, not only serve as beneficial in the process of letting go of previous versions of ourselves, but how can, again, we show ourselves grace during this period? Because let's be honest, the limiting beliefs that we have often overshadow the nice voice that we would use when we're talking to a friend or talking to a child. So how can we shed those layers, right? Be intentional about it, and also show ourselves grace during that time.
Yeah, again, just a lovely question because it allows us the space to be reflective. And if we don't have built-in resilience and built-in confidence, then by all means, reach out to someone that can help with what that process may look like. So again, it could be a book, it's a podcast. There's so many opportunities for people that maybe don't have an immediate, family or tribe or support group right there, but start to use intention by connecting to someone that will begin to create this beautiful synergy and this partnership and this flow. So if we have an intention and it brings up a limiting belief, or it brings up a fear, or it brings up an insecurity, we now can go to an accountability partner or someone outside of that fear where they have this very unique objective observation to say, I know you set an intention to lose 10 pounds in the new year. Now, what is it that's blocking you from that? And of course, we can imagine we go back into the old thought process. We go back into the old habit. We don't maybe exercise that mind or body the way we thought we were going to, but our intention is still there. So I think really getting clear on why am I creating this particular intention? What is it going to do for me? How is it going to serve the greater good? Because having that purpose really aligns our intentions with something outside of ourself, which empowers the intention even stronger. And I really just think that looking at how intention builds resilience and resilience creates an empowered life. And when we live in the environment of empowerment, creativity, intentionality, purpose, servitude, divinity, and grace, they all start to attract and kind of flow into that space. So I think intentions are just such an empowering tool to use to reconnect not only to ourselves, but maybe that future aspect of us that can connect back to the innocence and the natural force of childhood. And then we start to see this beautiful fluidity of purpose, intentionality, empowerment, and how we really have that at our fingertips at all times. It's just the story that we tell ourselves that we've either lost it or it's gone. And certainly when we're going through a grief process, whether someone we love has transitioned or we've lost a job or just some aspect of ourself or a lifelong friendship, whatever the story may be, for many young people breaking up and losing, these mini love affairs throughout our life, all of that is okay. Now, what is my intention? How can I grieve through this process, but use this grief process to empower these skills and these tools in a different way so I do become a much more resilient human being? So as the challenges and the grief challenges appear in our life, we really have become this creative force. And we understand that through intention, we can move ourselves differently through these challenges. And that just, again, it just builds this empowered aspect of ourselves, and it helps us handle and deal with grace differently than had we not put that awareness onto those experiences.
And you said my favorite word, awareness. I think really when we're intentional, we're very aware of the end goal in mind, right? We're very aware of our emotions, of where we're at in the present state, right? Because I feel like grief, in a sense, if we're open to it, helps us to build awareness because it shows us two narratives, two stories at the same time. We are obviously in our emotions of whatever loss or change that occurred, and the world is still moving forward. People are still celebrating. People are still, bringing new life into the world or achieving new goals. So I think, again, intentionality is so key when you're in seasons of grief, because it can help you, in a sense, stay afloat.
Yeah.
Too, right? And I was literally thinking about this earlier today, Laura, like before we started this conversation. I said, intentionality reminds me too of like a life jacket that keeps you afloat during grief, right? Because we get to choose. We really do get to choose how long we grieve. We do. We can choose to grieve 20 years. We can choose to grieve for 10 weeks or 2 days. But again, the choice is within us. But I want to also say a little disclaimer too here, that the choice is in your hands, but really honor your feelings and emotions. Don't go based on the societal narrative of how you should go through your grief journey, whether it's through the 5 stages or, you do cartwheels down the person's, driveway after they transition. It looks different for everybody. So I think, again, I say that to really reiterate that the choice is in your hands, and it boils down to your intention. It really does boil down to your intention, your awareness, and also just being open to how that's going to show up in your life too.
And allow it to show up as it needs to. And we've talked about this, the grace through just allowing it to be what it needs to be in the moment. What you and I talk about a lot is how to empower the grief process is, when is that moment that part of you starts to look for the light, look for the relief, look for the moment of reprieve. That's that little indicator within that you're starting to come up and out. And there is a way to not feel guilty about letting go of the grief process and allowing yourself now to re-engage in life. And I think that's there's a nuance to that, because so many of us feel if we've lost a loved one, especially a parent, back in the old country, right? In the old days, I mean, there are people that wore black from head to toe for years, and some till they passed. We talk about this often too, like my stepfather, who I lived with since I was 3 years old, and he died at 90. He was all about celebrating. We knew when dad passed, it was, we cried, but it wasn't even that full on, what we would call ugly cry. He was amazing. And what he talked about right up until his transition, and the love and the joy and the fun that he created. And that's what we chose to celebrate. But not everyone does that. Sometimes we need to hide under the blankets and just be away from the world for a while. So I really think that there is a grace in every process, because it's an individual process, but to begin to empower through intentionality, through the life force, through the God force, the universal energies, tapping into our childhood creativity. All of this becomes, all of what we're speaking about today, people are in the power seat of choice, as I say, in the science of empowerment. One modality, one tool, one skill, one word in this podcast, this TV show, this beautiful platform of expression, so that the community has opportunity to take in something that resonates and aligns with them, and bring that into their new empowered life, bring that into their intentionality, and how maybe when grief challenges arise, they now have a bit more to choose from that can help empower them than weigh them down, detract them from their highest and best process.
Laura, as always, you always just share so many nuggets. It's like I've got so many questions ready, to go. So we're going to take another break right here on the Grief Grantor, everybody. When we come back, we're going to continue our conversation with Laura Brennan Ballet. We'll be right back.
Hey, how you doing? My name is Greg Russell. I'm the host of TechnologyTuesday.com. You can find us on the Conscious Business TV network every Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for the latest resources to help you make more money in your business. Join us on E360 TV. Come on.
All right, everybody, welcome back right here on the Grief Grantor. We were just having a great conversation, of course, about the power of intentionality and really understanding how to use that, especially during seasons of grief and seasons of change. Laura, I wanted to go back to something you brought up. When we think about number one, as I brought up in the beginning, when we celebrate during Christmas the birth of Jesus, right? Mm-hmm. And then every year around Easter, we celebrate his resurrection, right? So when we are in seasons of grief, when we're missing that person, I want to challenge everybody to think of the story of Jesus' resurrection, right? Like we celebrate, yeah, we cry when we think about his story, but when we think about our loved ones who have transitioned, there's no difference. Yeah. There is no difference. Why don't we celebrate them? Celebrate the life that they had here. Celebrate the lessons that we've learned from them. Celebrate the memories, celebrate the photos, the funny quirks, the crazy stories that still has everybody laughing out of their
the traditions that we continue from what we learned from them, which I think is just such a beautiful way to honor them.
Yeah, I think, if we learn to cultivate that celebratory into our own life, not so much through the transition of a physical person, but when we think about, if we go back to Christmas and we think about the birth of Jesus, think about our rebirth, the different rebirths that we've encountered throughout our life, right? Pivoting from one place of employment to the next, getting a promotion, or even looking at your mindset, like what I mentioned about being assertive, learning to be assertive when I had somebody literally tell me that I would never be. So looking at that aspect of the growth and trajectory, even in my own life, is profound because I didn't see myself in that boat. But now that I'm very present and very aware, I can appreciate it. I have full gratitude for it, 100%.
Yeah. And I love, I have so many, we all do around the world, so many connections where I've always said, even if it's not a religious viewing of the story of Jesus, look at it for what it is, this beautiful example of a human being that walked this earth, that traveled a path to serve a story, to remind us of our highest and best, of forgiveness first and foremost, and compassion. Now, we are not saying to everybody, if somebody is hurting you and you are in a very negative environment, this is a whole different story. We're using this story in a very positive, very loving sense at the moment, that he represented what it feels like for us in the human body to walk this earth, have these challenges, and rebirth our mindset, rebirth a new aspect of ourselves. However you want to use the story for your own good. So this is why when I have conversations around the world about religion, I don't get into that aspect. I'm like, first of all, none of us ever will truly know any part of the historical history, whether there's gods, one God, 15 gods, aliens, past civilizations. Okay, relax. Let's just take something out of it that can help us become a better version of ourselves. Show a more compassionate, understanding heart for one another, and really use that story to elevate and advance our own experiences here. And usually when I broach the subject like that, or the conversation, it puts people in this place of, okay, now I can see if I looked at the story and wasn't so steadfast on I believe or I don't believe, but I just looked at the story and realized that we have the opportunity to move through a challenge of deep grief, but also rise above that said challenge and look at it in a new light and use it to elevate our own humanness, which therefore creates, right, a better vibration, frequency, energy for the whole. So there's such a way to look at this. And I've come up against this often. And when I start to express it in that way, it really disarms people and they start to say, okay, So if the story was this man, this challenge, this tragedy, this experience, but what was the message in it? The
Mhm.
light, the compassion, the forgiveness, the resurrection of the new self in a better version of what was weighed down in the physicality. And there's a way for us to merge that alchemy of still being in our physical form, but rising the consciousness or the heart or the mind or the spirit to a higher level, which now we're talking about full intentionality of showing up in our most creative, empowered way.
Laura, I couldn't have said it better. I mean, I love how, again, it boils down to the story,
Yeah.
right? Put religion aside. This
Yeah.
is a story that a lot of people know, whether you believe or not. You've heard of
Yes.
the story of Jesus,
Yes.
his birth, his resurrection. You've heard it. And stories are how we overcome, right? Stories are as old as me and you, right? You
A
hear
little
of
bit older.
I mean, I'm just saying, I remember hearing different stories from being a little girl
Yeah.
about people who have overcome,
Yeah.
right? Because those are serving as an example, right? That mirror to show us that through this grief, through this challenge, that there is a light there, right? I
Yeah.
always think of the story of Job in the Bible.
Mm.
Job lost everything.
Yeah.
He lost everything, but yet he still stayed faithful. He didn't raise an arm at God. He still stayed. He still kept moving forward with life, even though
Yeah.
he lost everything. And how
And
many of us
again,
have a story
right?
similar to Job?
Even if they don't believe in the particulars of the story, it's another representation of a man, a human being, or a woman, in whatever case it may be. Their intentionality was to hold steadfast to the faith, and how that led his life past that moment of loss. And I think, again, this is the beauty of being in servitude and really connecting, human to human. We're showing in real time in the 21st century a story from eons ago that still are so important to this day. And now we have many individual stories. So if you move from religion, but there's someone that you're working with, there's someone that you are a neighbor with, there's someone that maybe you went to school with, their story is in place to serve someone else's exploration into intentionality, into grace, compassion, forgiveness, resilience. And so it really all is one environment, one human family, and how do we choose to look at our personal stories of grief? How can we empower our life while we're going through all these challenges, and then act as an example of resilience, grace, servitude, compassion for other people?
100%, Laura. I mean, it's amazing how we're literally one big family, but we get divided by these weird societal constructs,
Stories.
stories, narratives, whatever you want to call them.
Yeah.
But we're so connected in the experiences that we have. We've all experienced some sort of grief. We've all experienced immense joy, sadness, compassion, love. But yet there's always this divisiveness that tends to come through. But I think if we look at it just the way that you described, how when you explain to other people about the story of Jesus, look at it from, this is a story of a man who was
Yeah.
physically here, who
Yeah.
went on this journey, who
Yeah.
paved the way for us to learn the art of forgiveness,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Just leave it at that and be good with that, and let that settle in your heart, and let that settle in your creative nature. And now what can you do with that? And, you can look at so many of the greats of the world and use them as examples. This, of course, was magnified to, just a massive degree, but it serves a purpose. So the intention of that story from the creators, however you want to look at it, their intention was to serve a purpose in humanity. And I really think that whatever religious background we have, whatever universal powers we look at, whatever education and knowledge base we have, if we look at it with intention of purity, of grace, of dignity, of refinement, of reflection, all of these words that we can bring in and create this amazing lexicon around these words and create our own stories. Now, what do we do with them? How do we create through the lens of compassion, through grief, through empowerment, through grace, through resilience, so that other people can feel that they're not alone. They can sense that it's okay, and that within their own time frame, they can look for those, I always call them indicators, those markers of kind of peeking out from the veil of that immediate grief, and know that it will be okay. Maybe not right at this moment, but it will be okay. And I will re-engage. And now I'm going to do it one step up from when I went into the grief process. I'm going to empower myself so that I don't come out of it weighted down, darkened. I come out lighter, literally. There's a lighter force around my aura, my vibe, my frequency. I'm able to take this story and now impart it out to the masses so they are comforted. They know compassion, and they too can elevate in their own way by what I've presented. And now we're creating, right, forces of good and positivity and empowered humans that are really making a difference.
100%, Laura. And keeping the world going with light and being the change that we all wish to see.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, everybody, that was Laura Brennan Ballet that you heard from. And that concludes another episode of the Grief Grantor. Thanks for tuning in, and until next week, everybody.
Thank you for joining us on the Grief Grantor. May the story shared today light your path and guide your heart toward healing. Remember, with every moment of grief, there's an opportunity for gratitude, resilience, and empowerment. Continue your journey with us online and share your own story, because in this tapestry of life, every thread matters, especially yours.